Well, there's nothing wrong with commissioning testing. The dealer does a lot of work in order to...
Well, I'm all for being open-minded, but I'm not all for discussing this live on air, thank you.
We are profoundly sorry.
Oh, yeah.
Now, I'll keep this quick. I'm John Fox. I'm back with part 2 of my chat with XFM legend Ian Camfield. Now, if you missed part 1, then may I suggest you listen to that first. But for everyone else, get ready to hear the unbelievable story about how he got his first gig in America, the crazy world of US radio, and a man called Don Belucas. Let's crunch and roll.
Oh, yeah.
Well, let's move on because, I mean, there's so much we could talk about with XFM. We could do a whole episode of Crunch and Roll around it. Of course, I don't want to forget that you just a couple of things. You mentioned it briefly. You presented on VH1, MTV2. You hosted Download Festival, Wireless Festival as well. I mean, you did some incredible things during your time at X. But let's move on because you then moved to New York from XFM, and you go to, I mean, it's such an iconic station. You go to K-Rock. How the hell did that happen?
Well, I had started visiting America a lot. I never went to America until I was 20. And again, back in the days when the music industry had money, my first ever trip to America was a freebie. It was to take some prize winners who were XFM listeners to go see Placebo. That shows you how much money the music industry had. Placebo weren't even the headline act. It was a band called Stabbing Westward. But the record label did a winning weekend where the grand prize was you got to fly to LA to go see Placebo. And they called up and said to XFM, you know what, we've got even more money in our budget. Do you want to send a jock to take the prize winners and they can interview Placebo while they're there? I could have done an interview with Placebo 6 weeks later when they were back in the UK, but whatever. And I'm telling you this because I did that trip to America. I was on the ground for probably less than 48 hours in Los Angeles, which is a very long way to go for that little time. But I just loved it. From the very first time I was ever in America, I just got a sense that it was where I wanted to be. You know, there was all this rock on the radio that, as we've said several times already, there never really was in England. And yeah, I always liked American cop shows and that kind of stuff. I always had the notion that when I visited America, I would like it. But I'm not one of these people that goes, oh, you could feel it in the air. It was very spiritual. I'm not into that. But I just had a feeling that I fucking loved this place. and LA specifically, the West Coast is very, very different to, London. And I just adored it. And I started spending a lot of time in Los Angeles specifically on vacation. And I wanted to get a job out there. And I took some meetings when I was over there and I'd made some connections and nothing really came about. And I was still doing very well in the UK doing various different things. So I probably wasn't pursuing it like 100% diligently, but it was like a pipe dream of mine. And I would go to America just because I enjoyed it. But anyway, during that time, we ended up having a syndicated show briefly with K-Rock in New York and XFM in London. And I used to host it with a jock on K-Rock. And it was a show that was on both stations. We'd play our top 5 songs. She'd play their top 5 songs, and it was a thing. And that show was on for a while. That was a fun experience. K-Rock in that incarnation ended up flipping formats and going away. And then they brought it back again. And I was going to New York, this is the tail end of 2007, just to hang out for a few days, en route to, again, going to LA for a holiday. And I got a call from a girl called Sarah that I used to host the show with, the syndicated show, because I'd said, I'm coming into New York, we should get together. And she said, when you're here, do you want to do a show? And I assumed that they were thinking about putting our syndicated show back on because they brought K-Rock back. So I said, yeah, I'll do that. That'll be good. So anyway, I go to New York, and she said, because I was only going to be there for a few days, we need to have drinks the night that you arrive. I know you're going to be off the plane, but come and meet me. So I was like, okay. So, and I think we'd arranged for the next day we were going to be on air. So I go meet her in this bar in New York. I've literally landed there like 2 hours previously. So we're having a catch up, and I said, "Oh, it's great they brought back K-Rock." And I said, "So when we're on air tomorrow, are we going to do the format that we used to do for the syndicated show?" And she said to me, "No, I didn't want to tell you before you got here because I didn't want to give you too much time to worry. But we're not doing a show. You're going to do a show, and it's an audition for Afternoon Drive." I said, "What?" And she goes, "Honestly, I didn't know about this. Otherwise, I would have given you a heads up earlier." She said, "But I told the new bosses that you were coming in just to say that, I might bring you up to the radio station. And they said, Ian Camfield's coming." And she goes, "Yeah." And they said, "We've been listening to him on XFM online. We think he might be what we want for afternoons." And I had no idea. I mean, I'd have made more of an effort to be good. I mean, I guess I was good enough, but like they were listening. I had no idea that anyone was listening. But what happened was, someone had met someone else at a barbecue with an American radio exec who was in London at, I think it was the house of the person who at that time managed Lily Allen. I don't even know this person. I wasn't at this barbecue. But because I'd spent a lot of time in the States and made some inroads and had meetings and chats and stuff like that, my name was brought up at this barbecue, and that person went back to New York and they started listening and they liked what they heard. And so, yeah, the next thing I know, I'm on air the next day on K-Rock in New York doing a show, which is an audition for Afternoon Drive. And the boss came in and she said she liked it, but she needed to hear more. So they arranged for me to fly back into LA. I went to LA, had my holiday. They arranged for me to fly back to New York en route to going back home to London. So I left LA a few days early. I went back to New York for another couple of days, did another couple of shows on air, and I remember the program director saying, when you go to the airport to fly back to London, check in, go through security, all that, call me when you're waiting at the gate. So I'm waiting at the gate at the airport in New York to fly back to the UK, and I called the program director and she said, "All right, I love it. What will it take for me to get you to New York?" And that was how it started.
Wow. What a story.
Yeah.
Jesus. I mean, that barbecue's got a lot to answer for.
Barbecue has got a lot to answer for. And so I went back to XFM. They were good. I mean, I had a long-term contract with them. And K-Rock didn't want to wait that long, so I had to agree a time to get out of the XFM contract early, basically a time when XFM would allow me to leave early that wasn't too much time for K-Rock to wait. Plus, we had to get visas and things like that, and I'd never lived in the States at that point, so that was a whole new experience. But we agreed 3 months was a period of time that K-Rock were prepared to wait. 3 months was enough time for XFM to find a replacement for whatever show I was doing then. I honestly can't remember what day part I was on then. And so, everyone went to work. I started doing paperwork for immigration, and 3 months later I was living in New York.
Tell me about your time in New York, because I've been to New York a couple of times. It is an incredible city, isn't it?
It's amazing. I mean, it was funny because I never actually had any ambition to live in New York. When I visited, I was never that impressed by it because I was always fascinated with the West Coast and something that was so different to how London feels, whereas New York is obviously very similar. It's got that city feel, there's public transport, the seasons, all that kind of thing. But obviously a job offer in New York, I was never going to turn that down because it was tremendously exciting. And I mean, I within a month, I absolutely loved it. They paid me a lot of money to go to K-Rock. I lived very well in New York. I don't think I would have liked it so much if I was hustling, but I could afford a great apartment on the 21st floor of a high-rise with views of the Hudson River. If I wanted to, I could afford to have everything delivered. I mean, these days you can get everything delivered anyway, but back then, it's 2008, still a big thing to live in Manhattan where you can get all the deliveries and just... it's like the epicenter of convenience. I remember when I was first there, a cab driver said to me, Manhattan is instant gratification, and it really is. You know, if and you don't have to be super rich, but you need to do relatively well, and if you do, it's just fucking great. I mean, it's literally what you want when you want, and that's how I want to live my life. So I absolutely adored it, and I although I still preferred maybe the weather aspects of the West Coast. The attitude of the people in New York also appealed to me because everyone's very busy. It's very competitive. There's a lot of get up and go. Everyone's got somewhere to be, someone to see, something to do. It's like the ultimate work hard, play hard culture because you have to work hard. Everything is competitive. Whether you're a banker or you're a security guard or you're a trainer in a gym, everything is competitive, specifically in Manhattan. Everyone prides themselves on being the best, and there's a lot of pressure with that. But the flip side of that is, if you're going to put up with that pressure and you're going to work that hard, then when you're not working, your playtime needs to be great, because otherwise, what's the point? So again, that work hard, play hard thing, I just loved it. And if you're that type of personality, it becomes very addictive because there's nowhere else like it. So lifestyle wise, I absolutely loved it. The work situation was absolute chaos from even before I got there. But again, it was like my introduction to how corporate America works, and also, the world of radio, which you probably think is quite cutthroat over there. It ain't got nothing in comparison with the way that they do business in the US. I mean, again, we could do a 5-part special on just my year at K-Rock. I mean, the stories are just extraordinary. But I'll give you this one for the start, right? This is how cutthroat things are in America. So they'd signed me on, a decent amount of money, and they hadn't made any other overseas hires. So I'm not saying like I was a big thing, but I was a big thing in so much as they were bringing me from overseas, which isn't a thing that American radio does very often. And I got hired by 2 people specifically, one of whom was the market manager for that company in New York, who had been there for 25 years. He was the guy that hired Howard Stern to go to New York, because K-Rock was Howard Stern's FM radio station that he broadcast from before he went to Sirius satellite radio. So this guy's got tremendous amount of equity in that market and also that company that no longer exists. So it was him and a lady called Tracy Cloherty, who was the program director at the time, that hired me, right? The market manager got fired in my 2nd week, and Tracy got fired in my 5th week. So I'd been there barely a month, and the 2 people who brought me in are gone. And I wouldn't say I enjoyed it any less because, again, going back to that Richard Park thing, there's something about the way I'm wired where I like the thrill of it. I like it to be high octane. I like it to be all about numbers. I like it to be competitive. I'm a very strong person. By virtue of that fact, if it's in a business sense, I don't want to be around weak people. It needs to be a strong team. But the experience of New York was that on a whole other level. And there were so many cooks in the kitchens and hirings and firings and this person playing a game of one-upmanship against that person. And there's a level of management in America that you don't really have in England that they call corporate. That's like a high up level of management. It never even occurred to me till I got the job at K-Rock. It wasn't just the programmers that needed to be impressed. I needed to have some allies in corporate because they made decisions within the company. And at that point in this company that's no longer in radio, there were people that had been there and in New York for years and years. And they all hated one another. And they would blow up radio stations and flip formats just to go, fuck you, to someone else. Like, it was literally like that kind of thing. It was like, if you ever seen the 80s movie Wall Street with Michael Douglas, that's obviously set in New York. It was that environment, but for radio. And some of these people that worked in corporate, I'm not just saying this because it was New York and the Jersey connection, But when I went out of my way to create relationships with them because it was the only way you could sustain any kind of long-term career there in amongst the chaos and the constant hirings and firings and in some cases rehirings. I would go in and have meetings with these people. It was like sitting down with the cast of The Sopranos. I mean, it literally was. I remember when I went back to XFM, sitting down with Richard Park, who by UK standards is probably the scariest radio person there is. I never found him to be that way. And I remember sitting down with him and saying, Richard, these people make you look like a teddy bear. And there was this one guy whose name was Don Belucas, which is a great real name. Yeah. His nickname was the Terminator because he used to work in the corporate office and the radio stations that company owned at the time were in various different buildings. If Don Belucas showed up in your building, it was not good news. And I remember sitting with Richard Park telling him these stories afterwards and him going, Don Belucas, the Terminator! See, like I said, there's a certain type of person, John, who likes this way of doing things. So I loved it for the year that I was there. But like I said, it was absolute chaos. And it was obvious that the format wasn't going to last because they weren't getting the ratings they were hoping for. But they also didn't stick to one strategy because 1 week it would be doing this, the next week it would be doing that, and like I said, all of these different people in the mix. And I had a year's contract to go there, and we had to get a new deal to renew my visa. And I remember we had meetings and they agreed to me getting a new 2-year deal, again on very good money, right? And so we started initiating conversations with the immigration attorneys again about renewing the visa and all this kind of stuff. And then suddenly that offer was on hold because I think behind the scenes they were having conversations about flipping the format of the radio station. And then they came back and made me a terrible offer of money. And I was like, hang on a minute. A month ago we were talking this. And now we're talking that. And they're like, yeah, well, this is also around the time that the banks collapsed. So the world's in kind of financial disarray. And anyway, I remember, again, this is another great view into how business gets done in America. I remember having a conversation with one of my allies in that company. And I can talk about this because that company is no longer in radio. And him saying to me, are you going to take the offer for reduced money? And I said, well, I really love living in New York, so I think I will. And I remember him saying to me, I think you need to realize that you're going to be calling their bluff if you say yes. And I said, what do you mean? And he goes, well, I think they've made a reduced offer thinking that you're going to say no because they don't want to tie you into a new deal because I think they're going to flip the format of the station. And if you've got a deal, they're going to have to pay you, blah, 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 blah. He said, so the fact they made one offer and then took that back and made this really quite shitty financial offer is bad enough. He goes, but I think you need to realize that if you say yes to this bad offer, that money isn't going to go up, but it might go away. And I was like, what, they're going to take away the offer completely? I haven't got this far. He was like, there's nothing this company won't do. And anyway, so I said yes. And then that's exactly what happened. They were like, well, we're going to fire you anyway. And I remember I had an agent at the time who did a great job of negotiating me into and out of K-Rock. And I was on air. And he'd called me and said, do you want to have this conversation while you're on air? Because it's not going to be a good conversation. And he basically said to me, yeah, you were right. They're now claiming there was never any offer whatsoever. And, you're done at K-Rock and the station's probably done. And so we were trying to get some going away money because I was going to have to move back to England. And I remember their corporate people at that time had said to my agent, no, we don't owe Ian anything. And he said to them, no, I think you do, because I've got an email chain of, at this point, like 30 emails about this offer and that offer and blah, 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 blah. And I remember the person in corporate had said to my agent, are you listening to Ian online right now? And my agent goes, yeah. And he said, if you want me to prove what I can do, I'll have him taken off air during the next ad break, and he won't be back on again. And that was the start of the negotiation. Anyway, so I ended up obviously not re-signing with K-Rock and moving back to England. But the upshot of that situation was that was just another day in the way that America does business. I mean, anyone who's been in corporate America would be listening to this story, not being anywhere near as shocked as you and probably most of the people listening are, because it's just how it is. And so I kind of behaved accordingly and, signed a deal to leave. And then all of the people that had tried to fuck me then came into my studio and basically were shaking my hand and saying, sorry, it ended like this, but this is business. It's only business, blah, 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 blah. And I've still got an email that I've kept from one of the key corporate people who offered me a job and then completely fucked me. And then once it was all resolved and signed off, sent me an email saying, we didn't want it to end like this. We'd absolutely consider working again in the future. These are unprecedented financial times. Keep in touch and keep the faith.
We're having a party. Oh, yeah.
All right, no, I fully appreciate this. Really is a whistle-stop tour of your career, but let's move on. So you come back to the UK, and you come back in 2009 to XFM. Richard Park, was he a major part of that?
Yeah, because he had left. I'd worked with him, when he first took over XFM, and we got on very, very well. I was very sad to see him go. And he had come back because Global had taken it over, and now it really was an empire. It was the size that you know now, or getting to be that way. And so my agent had put in a call, because obviously I would have been going back to the station that I only left about a year ago, but Richard Park didn't care about that. Richard Park, like me, we hadn't seen one another in quite some time. And also his son Paul Jackson was running XFM at that point, who I never met up until then. So I ended up going back and going in and having a meeting, and I sat down with Parky, who basically said to me, all right, I'm back, you're back, let's show these fuckers how we do business. And so we did.
Did you enjoy going back?
No, I hated it. I mean, I enjoyed going back to having a job, and I was very grateful that I had that job, and I loved going back and working for Richard Park, because so many other people in radio in the UK, by the standards of the way in which I like to get things done, they just plod along, and I hate the plodding. That's why I loved New York. That's why I wasn't put off by my experience of being in New York and working for K-Rock. That didn't make me think, oh my God, these people are terrible, I never want to go back again. That made me think, I want to go back to America as soon as possible. It just can't happen right now, And so, but I hated being back in England. I really loved the lifestyle in New York. I just prefer life in America. I like the drive and the efficiency. I like loads of ice coming with my water. I like free refills on my coffee. I like customer service, which last time I went back to England last Christmas, they still haven't figured out, And I love it in America. My enthusiasm for America, even though I've lived here now on this run for over 8 years, and hopefully forever at this point, I just adore it. But none of my love of the everyday stuff that I love has worn off. So no, did I enjoy coming back? I fucking hated being in England. I fucking hated it. But I was very grateful to have my job back, and I loved working for Richard Park again and being in that empire and seeing that expand. And there were some really good things at Global as well. I started doing some things for LBC. Previously I would never have had the confidence to do talk radio. I mean, even if I was to do a morning show with long talk breaks, you don't have a 4-minute song to hide behind, if need be. Yeah. But I did so much stuff in America with different bits and pieces. I kind of developed a no fear attitude to everything, be it management being fired or doing talk radio. And at the time, some of the people running LBC had run the news services when I was at Heart back in the day. And again, I had a great relationship with Richard Park. He wanted to put me back into XFM, and I remember saying, like, I'll do it, Richard, but honestly, I can do it standing on my head. And there is this empire now. I want to do some other stuff. He never really warmed to the idea of putting me on Classic FM that I floated a few times. But I said, I've got opinions and stuff. I want to be on LBC. And they got me in doing bits and pieces on LBC and various other bits and pieces. So I really enjoyed that aspect of it, and I loved working with him again. Although I said I hated being in the UK, I did, but that was a lifestyle thing, and it's a personal choice about where I would rather live. At that point in time, American radio had absolutely fucked me, and UK radio had welcomed me back with open arms. Going back to work for my favourite person to work for in UK radio. So from that point of view, it was a great experience, and it was a very exciting time to be in that building in Leicester Square. That they'd renovated it in the time that I'd been away, and suddenly all of those radio stations were in there. It had become like the commercial radio version of Broadcasting House. And so to have all of that on all of those different floors, and also to have Richard Parker's, I don't know what title he'd given himself, God, probably at that point, God of Global, or I think it was Director of Broadcasting, on side going, try Ian out on this, give him that. It was just great. That side of it was great.
Well, look, you spent some years at XFM, and then in 2016, you moved back to the States. I'll be honest, Ian, you've answered a lot of my questions that I'd written down in front of me about the States. One of my questions, which I don't think you have answered, I mean, you mentioned previously that you hope that this goes on forever now in the States. It's your home, isn't it? I can sense that. What's the landscape like in America? Because, of course, here in the UK, jobs on commercial radio are very few and far between. Is it similar in the States? Is the landscape changing like that in the States?
Yeah, I mean, I think we're further down that. I was going to say route. See, now I've become American.
Well, I'm going to be honest. You've said vacation 3 times in the pod, so...
Well, you pick up the vernacular, if not the accent. The route. We are going down that route. You're going down that route, kind of behind where America is. I mean, yeah, there's a lot of... I mean, I do 5 markets a day in America now. I'm on in Dallas, Seattle, Detroit, Denver, and San Diego. And they're 5 separate shows. So the idea, I never claim I'm somewhere I'm not, but the idea is if you listened in any of those markets, you would think I was live and local on that station. I probably do more than most American jocks, but it's not irregular to be in a bunch of places. And getting jobs, yeah, they are few and far between, because even though obviously this country is way bigger than the UK, the consolidation and the syndication has been such a big theme of US radio in the past 10 to 15 years.
Technically, and this is an Anorak's question, how do you do those 5 shows then? Do you broadcast from a studio? Do you go somewhere, or is it all from home?
I could do it from home. I prefer to do it from a studio. I just prefer that professional setup. My challenge is 4 out of those 5 shows, they're in different time zones, but they overlap to some extent. And so I'm doing them. None of them are actually live, but they're all done as live. And so I have to have a system, because if you looked at it on paper in terms of the time in Dallas where I live, you'd be thinking, well, how is he on at 7 a.m. in Denver, but then he's starting at 8 a.m. in San Diego, and I've worked out a system for that, which is very complicated. I don't even know if that system would work for anyone else. But again, you get experience and confidence, and you get to know yourself, and you do what's required, and you figure out, what's required. So I do it all from one studio. I do it by going in and out of the different markets. There are local people in those markets that feed me information. So it's not like I'm a one-man band for all of those places. It's very much a team structure. It just happens that the way in which the team is defined, or the locations in which they live, isn't the same as a radio setup would have been 20 years ago, but, that's true in the UK as well.
What's been your biggest achievement in your career so far?
I think probably maintaining a career in radio. I mean, someone asked me for another interview the other day, what was the most exciting thing? And that would have been going to New York, because it was the first time I'd lived in the States. It was a huge radio job. But also from a personal point of view, I moved there by myself. I'm from Essex, so even though I'd been on the radio in London, I'd only ever lived an hour away from where I grew up. So, I left home at 19 and moved to London. That was exciting, but again, 60 minutes from where I grew up. So moving by myself to New York, which was a place that I didn't really know and barely knew anyone, that as an experience both professionally and personally, was really exciting. But I think maintaining a career in radio and probably building on it at this stage as well, because as you said, it's very difficult to get jobs in radio now. They're few and far between. And if you want to do one that pays a decent amount of money and you want to have any kind of longevity, you need to do a lot. And, I went to New York and that ended, and then I went back to England, and then I got a job in Phoenix, and that was a job on just 2 radio stations. And then I moved to Dallas to do 1 specific radio station, and now I'm on 5, and depending on a production team and where the technology is, there's a chance I might do even more. But it's kind of what you have to do if you want to be in radio at the moment. And I'm at a point in my life where, I love my life of living in the States. I also love my life of being on the radio. I still like being on the radio. None of it's real work. I always say I've never done a real job for a living, and I still stand by that. In terms of the hours that are required, it is like a real job now. I mean, I'm in that studio for 8-9 hours a day. If you take from the time I go in, prepare all the shows, and then churn them out, because it's like a machine. It has to be to deliver, 5 shows every day. And I'm at a point where even as recently as, say, 3 or 4 years ago, I don't think I could have done what I'm doing now. It's taken the experience that I've had and the confidence that I've grown to be able to 5 days a week go in and churn out that much radio. I mean, to give you some perspective, they call them talk breaks here, that what the UK would call links, right? Yeah. Monday through Friday, I'm doing 120 links a day, right? And that also, most of those shows, they're mornings or afternoon shows. It's not a that was, this is. I'm talking about stuff. They want angles. They want entertainment. They want takes on things. There's I'm not just going in and jocking up to the vocals on Hosier or whatever it is. So it takes a lot. I mean, I love weekends when I just lay by the pool and sometimes listen to your podcast and switch my brain off, And like I said, none of it's real work. I could be digging dishes, but there's a lot involved at this point. And there are, proper working hours. And it's such a wide skill set that I've developed. I think that is the thing that I'm proudest of achieving. Maintaining a career in radio, specifically in America, but also operating at this level. Because in 2025, those two things go hand in hand. If you ain't operating at this level, you ain't going to have a long-term career.
Well, there's nothing wrong with testing. The dealer does a lot of work in order to...
Well, I'm all for being open-minded, but I'm not all for discussing this live on air, thank you.
We are profoundly sorry.
Oh, yeah.
I have got 2 more questions for you, Ian, and forgive me because I look, we've taken a lot of your time and genuinely really appreciate it, and I've loved it. I could talk to you for hours. You're just a very engaging character, and one thing I've realised is that you are wired very different to me.
Right.
But part of me wishes I was wired like you. So maybe we need to Zoom more often, maybe.
Well, we could do that, but also it's certain people are meant to do certain things. I think I was meant to be on the radio. I was meant to be in America. I was meant to be a component in corporate America. I mean, it takes a certain type of person, and most people would not want to deal with the corporate world that I live in, but I thrive on it. I remember when I got flown into Dallas when I was living in Phoenix to have a meeting about taking what initially was just a job in Dallas, and has grown massively from that point. And I had a meeting with the guy that runs the Dallas market, who had prior association with that previous company that ran the station that I was on in New York, right? So he knew, how they operated and how they did business. And he said to me, I've heard the tapes and I get a good vibe from you. He goes, but I got to ask you, after that New York experience, I know it was some time ago, but why on earth did you want to come back? and I said to him, because I'm addicted to the sheer fuck-offness of it all. And that's the way that I describe it. I mean, it is the sheer fuck-offness of it all. And you don't know what's going to come. And you don't know how things are going to play out. But if you're that kind of go-getter and you thrive in that environment, and believe me, I don't want that all the time. I like my home life to be very easy. If there's anything that comes up like in personal life and it's stressful, unless I really have to deal with it, I'm like, no, we're not doing that because everything else is stressful enough. So I've got a switch off point. But when it comes to, business, everything's numbers. I'm all about getting the job done. I'm about beating the other guy, and that's how America thrives. And so that's not for everyone, but it is for me. Whereas in comparison, many aspects of life in England, don't take this the wrong way, or do, I don't care. They're just too fucking mediocre. It's mediocrity squared for me, England. Whereas here is, I'm just a bit more America, fuck yeah. If that answers your question.
It does.
Was there a question? I don't even know at this point.
I have two more questions. Questions. And please, just answer them very briefly because I've taken enough of your time. My first question, I normally ask my guests who they would like to hear on Crunch and Roll. I'm going to change yours slightly because I cannot work out what your answer is going to be. Who do you like on the radio?
I'll be honest, I hardly ever listen to the radio because I spend so much time doing it myself. Actually, no, that's not true. I still stream Nick Abbott on LBC from the States. I think he's great. I might disagree with some of what he says, but I love the way that he says it. And I don't. And we live in an era now where people who've got different views can't get along. I don't like that. If you're selling it to me in a way that you mean it, or even if you don't mean it, if you're just doing it in an entertaining way, I find that very, very engaging. You'll never get Nick Abbott on, though, because he just hates people. And it's funny because I haven't seen him in years and years, but he used to go back to he started at Virgin Megastore. He used to go back to the Virgin Megastore every time he got fired to earn some money before he got another gig. So I'm very pleased. I think he sustained a career at LBC for many, many years now without being fired. I listen to him. Apart from that, I really don't listen to that much radio just because I'm doing it for 9 hours a day, and that's not me going, oh God, no one's as good as me. I don't mean that at all. I just mean I want to shut off, or I want to listen to some music that's, but I guess that's probably why I'm listening to LBC, because it's just talk based,
Right. Final question, Ian. We really have brushed over your career and the influence that you've had in the music industry as well. I think we've brushed over that, but we've kind of chased against time. One more question is, what do you think, after everything that you've done in your career, all the success that you've had, all the walls that you've climbed, everything that you've done, what do you think Tommy Vance would say to you now?
I would think and hope that he would be very proud. I think he knew what it meant to me to get a rock show on the radio. He was alive for several years that I did a rock show. And like I said, there was a period of crossover time when I was doing a metal thing on MTV2 and he was at VH1. So that was just great. I mean, he might not have cared about it because he was the older guy, but as the kid, as the apprentice, if you like, to be I'm in the same office, And And you know, the funny thing with Tommy is, and I don't know how many people know this, it's like we did things in reverse. He actually started his career in US radio. He started majorly on the pirate ships in the 60s on Radio Caroline, right? And then went through the BBC and everything else. But he grew up in Canada and in the US. And his first job in radio, he was one of what they used to call the boss jocks on 1960s, the first top 40 format radio. And I can't remember the name of the station, but he was on basically the first American top 40 station in Los Angeles, right? In 1960s, you know, which would have been like such a big deal. And it, you know, I'd spoken to him about this and he never really had an answer as to how things would have turned out if he'd have stayed in America, because he only left because he got drafted for the Vietnam War, and because of his family history being British, but he was born in America. I might be simplifying the ins and outs of it. Basically, he was legally in America and had this great job on American radio, but Vietnam was happening, and if he was going to stay in America, he had to go fight in Vietnam, or he could go back to England and would not have to go and fight in a war, because I think the parents were British. I think that was it. So he would tell me this story about, he thought his career was over in 1964 or 65, whenever it was, because he was earning all this money. And imagine also being the British guy at the time when the Beatles are a big thing in 1960s America in Los Angeles. I mean, Jesus Christ. Like, he was like, I couldn't tell you the lifestyle that I was having. But in order not to go fight in a war, I had to move to England, and Caroline was just starting. And obviously that did become a big thing. He goes, but imagine this. I'm the British guy living this dream life on the radio in Los Angeles. And then 2 weeks later, I'm in the middle of nowhere standing on the back of a ship thinking, this is my radio career now? What the hell have I done? So it's a kind of funny turnaround that he started, you know, his career in American radio, and then obviously, you know, had a long-term career in the US. You know, I think he would be tremendously proud that, you know, I did all those things with rock. I'm still doing things with rock. And I'm on, you know, I've got a career in the States, which from a lifestyle point of view is the place that I absolutely love. So I think, you know, if he's wherever people go and they look down or look up or whatever the case is, I think, you know, he would love the fact that I achieved what I decided I wanted to do on that January night in 1987 when my dad took me into the Friday Rock Show studio to see that show broadcast live when I was 8 years old.
Ian, thank you so much for your time. It's been absolutely fascinating.
You are very welcome. I've enjoyed it.
Would you please do us the honours of taking us away with the end credits?
You've been listening to Crunch and Roll with me, Ian Camfield. Subscribe on your favourite podcast app to get every new episode as soon as they drop. Crunch and Roll is a 969 media production, presented by John Fox and produced by Simon Boronowski. I changed it again. Oh yeah. There are some people that I've heard on this podcast and I've been like, oh, I could tell some better stories about them than the ones they told on the podcast. But I'll tell you this, when he was in London, there were some nights where he used to